All right, now we're being recorded.
Okay, good. Recorded live. So thanks for having me again. I was on one of your meetings before, so some of the people in your group have heard me tell my story before, but I'm sure there's many new people. So thank you for having me. So I was raised in the Jehovah's Witness organization until around age 20. I decided to leave on my own. And when I chose to do that, I just decided that I was going to close the door on that and pretend like it never happened, especially after years of kind of fighting the shunning and trying to get people to take my side and understand that, you know, I wasn't expecting them to leave. I just wanted the freedom to do what I wanted. When that failed and I knew that wasn't going to work, I tried to do a little bit of therapy and just move on with my life. And with time, things got better. And I thought, oh, I did a really good job of closing that door and I'm doing really good. Until a few years ago when I found the Empowered ex-Jehovah's Witness group, and I started interacting with people who had also left. And especially Rodney Allgood, who runs the group, has a deprogramming program that I decided to go ahead and take. And during that program and my interactions with some of the people in the group, I realized that there were still some things woven into my subconscious that my conscious mind didn't even know that I was doing. And I realized that there was a lot of healing and some dark night of the soul shadow work that needed to be done, so that I didn't continue to sabotage relationships, you know, and not necessarily romantic ones, but ones with my family, ones with my work and customers and clients and coworkers. It really did affect all areas of my life without me being aware of it still. So I did have to continue with more healing.
So that's kind of, thanks for sharing that, by the way. And that's kind of why we wanted to weave this into understanding religious narcissistic environments. And why I wanted to have you come on with me is because those narcissistic environments are so similar. It's funny when we're knocking on the doors of people as, you know, being recruiters for the church,
right?
Called missionaries, but they're really recruiters. We think, you know, the only ones that do this is Jehovah's Witnesses, but we're so different from Jehovah's Witnesses until you leave and then you talk to Jehovah's Witnesses and you realize, oh my gosh, we had so much in common about how we were programmed and how we were conditioned. And it's really synonymous with being raised in a narcissistic environment and not realizing it. You see, when you're in a relationship with a narcissist, someone who is categorized as a narcissist, or they actually have the diagnosis of narcissistic disorder, you don't realize, the partner doesn't realize that they're being abused, that they're being manipulated, that when somebody tells them, they get very defensive. Like when people say, you know, LDS people were raised in a cult, we get defensive. I wasn't raised in a cult. I'm too smart for that. Or I didn't feel like I was raised in a cult.
Exactly.
The same thing in like an abusive relationship. You don't realize the depth and the complexity and the entanglement and the effect it has on your mind. And so when we say that you were raised in a narcissistic abusive environment, people are like, no, he wasn't. Not at all. No, it was weird. And it was, no, it had some strong black and white views, but it wasn't narcissistic.
Right.
You don't want to admit it, but something fabulous happens when you admit the level and complexity of abuse. It's almost only until you can admit it that you can start unraveling it and untangling it.
Right. I found that to be very true. Whether it is a mind control organization, whether it's a mind control relationship or a narcissistic relationship, it's the same thing with drug or alcohol abuse. Until the person acknowledges that there's a problem or acknowledges the source of the problem and does the work, it affects their whole life in ways that they don't necessarily even realize.
Yeah, because they don't know what healthy feels like.
True, they don't know.
It's so foreign. So before we go into this narcissistic religious, abuse, I want to be very clear. Narcissism, narcissistic has just been a real buzzword, and I don't want to fall into the category of labeling everything narcissism. But what we're going to be listing here is narcissistic characteristics. We're not diagnosing the church with narcissistic, giving them a diagnosis. However, they have a lot of the elements that create a narcissistic environment that actually breeds narcissists. And it also, for those who are empaths, it unites them. There's a trauma bond there that happens. And so just to be clear, the narcissistic disorder and narcissistic characteristics, two different things. Good?
Yeah, definite difference of diagnosis and characteristics. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is kind of identify, first of all, what it feels like to be someone who's been in a narcissistic environment. And then we're going to give you some tips on how to break free of it and how to reclaim your life and empower yourself, because that's what we do. So Cyndi, what are some of the things that you notice about people who have been narcissistically abused in a relationship where there's narcissistic abuse?
Yeah, well, what I've noticed is they have this very selfish need. They're so selfish that they really don't even identify with what your needs are. So they become desensitized to other people's needs. And they have a need to feel very important, and they constantly feel like they are always right. So it's really hard to see other people's points of view. It's really difficult to compromise or even interact with people that have a different opinion or a different perspective than you do.
And so that was coming from the angle of being the narcissist, right? Where you start to develop this elitist kind of attitude. And so explain how that is in Jehovah's Witnesses, because it's very similar in the LDS church. Where do you really believe that you're the one true church and that you're?
Yes. So, yes, the Jehovah's Witnesses feel like they are the only ones who have the truth. They are the only ones that will either move into paradise after Armageddon, or if they're one of the chosen 144,000, they get to go to heaven when they die. If you're not one of those two groups, then you're going to die at Armageddon. So they feel very elitist. And so when you belong to that group, you kind of feel special and elitist and better than everybody else, because of course now, since you are a part of the group that only has the truth, now you are better than everyone else because you know the truth and they don't. So that kind of breeds that elitist mentality.
Well, and for me, it's like an ego. It's an ego hit where you want to feel special. The ego wants to feel like they're in the right path. They want to feel like they have one up on other people. And so when you have that and you're born into that system, you don't realize that you're putting an imprint on your mind and the way that you see the world. You're actually feeding off of this idea of superiority and this idea of everybody has something less than what I have because I have the gospel of Jesus Christ and I have this secret in. And unfortunately, what I've experienced in my own life is that once you come out of that, you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so underdeveloped.
Yes.
And
yes,
I don't know very much in the world. And so, but that doesn't change. And we talked about this earlier. This doesn't change your attitude. And just because you woke up doesn't mean that you stop having that craving to feel like you're like a little bit one up on other people. Because now, the church isn't true. And now you're one up on the people who are in the church.
Exactly. And I find that it's especially true with people who were raised from children up, because I'm sure everyone watching probably knows that your subconscious is programmed without filters up until the age of about 5 to 7. And so when you're in that kind of an environment, you just take that in and you think that's normal. So just because you leave at whatever age you leave, that's still part of the subconscious that it just runs in the background until you remove it and reprogram it with something else. So I find that that's even more apparent in people who grew up as a small child and left later in life.
So that's one thing that comes back to you as a narcissist. Being raised in a narcissistic environment is that feeling of superiority, that almost if we lose that feeling of superiority, we feel like we're non-existent in the world, or that we don't matter, or unless we maintain that some level of superiority or in some level of extraordinary exclusiveness, that we're just normal, ordinary, vanilla people and we don't have any value.
Exactly. Well, especially when you're fed as women, in those types of organizations, you've already been taught to feel like you're not important, that you're not valued, that you are less than. So yes, when you lose that other piece that makes you special, it just complicates it.
Yeah. So I'm going to list some of the things that you can tell if you were raised in a religious or a narcissistic environment. People who doubt themselves, people who can't trust other people. In some ways, the church or that environment was where you gathered all your worth. And so you feel like without that you have no worth. And a lot of people will keep their children in that because they're afraid that if they're not indoctrinated in these beliefs, that they're not going to be principled children. And so we're really conditioned to believe that the church is where we gain our worth. Also, they always have a feeling of inadequacy or insufficiency. They have a lost identity, a lack of confidence. They're oversensitive to criticism and judgment. Everything you do is insufficient, like you're just never good enough. You think it's all your fault when things go wrong. That has been huge for me. You censor your true feelings so that you won't ignite the feelings in others. You feel over responsible for other people's feelings, and especially if they're going to reject your true feelings. They make excuses for the church's behavior. I find people, even after they leave, they make excuses for poor behavior in the church. And there's just a sense of obligation to protect the church. And how many women in narcissistic relationships, that even after they leave or try to leave, they're always giving excuses for why their spouse has been mistreating them. Like they're guarding and protecting them, that they see the good and they map onto the good because the narcissist or the narcissistic institution is created that way for you to only see the good, only see the inspiring and faith-fulfilling things. And so it's hard to leave because there's a lot of good, but that good overshadows what's toxic and what's affecting your life. So one more thing here, they're confused about what to do. They're hazy in their mind, don't feel direction. And so those are some of the symptoms that you feel if you've been raised in a narcissistic environment. Did you experience any of those things, Cyndi, when you were leaving Jehovah's Witnesses?
Oh, sure. Pretty much all of them. Really, I mean, even after, many years of being in it, I always found that underlying lack of self-worth, never being good enough. If something went wrong in any relationship, and the relationship could be romantic relationship, even families, especially at work, there was always this doubt about, did I know what I was talking about? Was it good enough? Did people value what I had to say? And then if something went wrong, of course, it was always my fault, because that's what I had been taught before. So yes, definitely all of those things that you mentioned have been experienced by me over the course of years until I did some more healing, because it takes time to work through those issues. It takes a lot of courage for people to do it, and it takes, a village sometimes to help you see that.
Well, that's because you're not around people that will explain it to you. It's just like in a narcissistic relationship, the narcissist tries to insulate you and starts to control who you're allowed to see, how long you're allowed to be out, what you're allowed to do, because they want to control the environment. And that's kind of like the church. I mean, there are other places where the church isn't so dense, like more in the West, or I'm sorry, in the East, where the LDS church isn't so dense, where people have to get along with people with other faiths. But like in Utah, Arizona, Idaho, in those places, you just naturally, your church is your church family, and you don't hear much more about that, especially in Utah. You don't hear much more about the rest of the world. And so you don't, when you try to leave, you have no support system. This is just like an abusive woman, like all of her support system has collapsed because she's trying to sustain this toxic relationship. So when she tries to leave, she's like, I have no resources, I have no support. And a lot of times that happens with men and women when they leave the church, the same thing. It's like that they've become codependent on the church. And when they try to leave, they feel it's terrifying. Actually, for me, it was terrifying.
Yeah, and I found with Jehovah's Witnesses being so, they wanted you to be exclusively joined at the hip with only people that were part of that organization. So you didn't associate with people outside. You didn't go to the university. You didn't go to college. You everything was about the church. And when I left, there was a lot of shame and embarrassment about the way that I had been raised. So I didn't naturally reach out to other people for the help that I needed or wanted, because I thought, oh, if they know that about me, they for sure aren't going to like me now because I'm weird to them. So, I didn't naturally reach out for encouragement or help and guidance on what to do. So you just kind of pretend it didn't happen, which is not good, because then you're not doing the shadow work that you need to do to fix some of those things.
Well, that's what I talk about a lot of my coaching, is that just because you woke up doesn't mean that you're still going to take all your strategies, your coping strategies that you learned in a toxic environment, and you're going to try to apply them to your new life. And until you are able to acknowledge, say, no, these are toxic patterns and toxic methods, I have to learn new skills. Otherwise, we just transfer it into our next life, and we don't understand why it's not improving, why it's not getting better. In fact, it can get worse because you were taught to pray, to read your scriptures, get to the temple, to do all these things. That's how you're going to get answers to your problems. And so you try to do all that when you don't believe in it anymore, and it just creates this cloud. It creates confusion. It creates doubt, because you're betrayed by the institution. You don't know who to trust. You don't trust yourself because you thought it was true all this time. And so there's
Exactly.
How do you get grounded? What is one of the things that helped you get grounded at that time? Because you were pretty young when you left.
Yeah. So I was about 18 when I kind of unofficially left. But it wasn't until I was about 20. One of the things that helped me get grounded was I was lucky enough to have grandparents that took me in, so that weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. So I did have a little safety net, and therapy helped, reaching out to someone professional for counseling, and then just learning about how to build self-confidence and self-worth and getting out there. And the more I got out there and the more I talked to other people, then I was able to realize that the world wasn't the way I had been raised to believe. And I started to just expand more and more because I became more self-confident in looking into other things.
So that reminds me of this phenomenon that happens when we try to leave the LDS church. We try to keep one foot in and one foot out. Many times because we have family members that are in, or because the rigidity of the doctrine is so strong that we're afraid that if we leave, we lose everything in the next life. There's just so much risk in crossing that line. And so psychologically, we think if we have one foot in and one foot out, it allows me to explore this whole big world that's trying to expand for me, but it keeps me in touch with my community. And what I found is that when we try to blend that, and people do it for many reasons. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I am saying that it wasn't until I could fully cross the line, get this foot out of the church, and start to move over without needing to be in it at some level, that I started to see just how toxic it was. And I started to see why I was justifying toggling in and out of that line. But it wasn't until I completely said, no, this is not right for me. I'm stepping away. And that could look like resignation. For you guys, it would be like disfellowship or fading, or
Right.
or you just say it's not right for me, and it's not working. And now it's like you give yourself full permission to see the complexity of the abuse and to observe. And this is one of the ways to heal, is to observe the methods that are being used to keep you indoctrinated. They're more complex than what you think. It can take a woman years and years and years to get, and I say woman, but women do it to men too. It can take an abused partner years and years and years to really understand just how much abuse was going on in their environment.
Yeah, we have a lot of people who do that too. And again, as you said, I'm not going to say what's right or wrong for each person, but what I have found is, during the early years when I was still trying to have that relationship, trying to justify with people who were still in, especially family members, why I didn't understand why they couldn't agree that if they wanted to stay in the organization, they still wanted to be Jehovah's Witnesses. I didn't have a problem with that. I just wanted them to accept that I didn't want to be part of it, and we still have that relationship. And by doing that, I still kind of had one foot in, even though it wasn't because I still believed or I wanted to do anything. I was still having the day-to-day connection or frequent connections. And you still tend to make excuses for the church and for the people, and you still have a small anchor. And I kind of think about that as being in a boat, a small boat out on a lake. And you may have a small anchor that you throw over while you're fishing or whatever you're doing. If a strong current comes along, you can move a little bit. The water will move you if there's a strong enough current, but that anchor still keeps you from moving all the way out. And so for me, finally leaving, finally closing the door, no contact, clarity became more apparent. Clarity became a bigger part of my life. I really saw things the way they were, and it allowed me to move on. And I kind of allowed that boat to move to calmer waters, and that's where I threw my anchor. And I had to swim with different fish and, find a new environment. But when you're still half in or half out, and one thing that's really common with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses is they like to watch those videos on YouTube all the time about what they're up to. And they'll talk to each other. Did you see the new video about what Jehovah's Witnesses are doing now? Or did you see the program that they had on TV? And for me, I don't watch those because it just takes me to a place that makes me where I don't want to be. I've outgrown that. I don't believe it. And I don't need any more justification of why I made that decision. I did that a long time ago. So moving on, moving away, closing that door certainly helps get clarity, focus, understanding, and helps you get a different mental attitude.
Thanks for sharing that. That is one thing that LDS people work with or deal with too, is that we get so enamored with all the stories that validate our new point of view. And what it does is it when we hear another story or it's validated another person's story, it almost re-wounds us. It feels validating, but validation is not healing. We need that validation initially in the beginning, especially. So those stories are important. I'm not trying to discredit the work that a lot of the people who are exposing the church right now are doing, but we can get obsessed in that and just watch it day in and day out. And it creates an adrenaline, a chemical, maybe it's not adrenaline, but it's this feeling of connectedness and validation and worth that you're trying to seek outside yourself because it's collapsed with the church. So now you're uniting with another group, but it doesn't mean that group is necessarily healthy. And so I think Rodney is the one, it is Rodney that told that explains this, like having a spouse where you find out they were cheating, and you go back and you look and see what their records are, because you want to look for more cheating and more evidence. Well, you already know that he's a cheater.
Right? Yeah, he talks about them stalking that person's, Facebook page, whether it's your other spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend, and you have to keep validating, what a horrible, see, look what they're doing now. See, that's why that didn't work. And how many times do they have to do it before that was a hard line for you? So once you've made the decision, don't go back and rethink about it and review additional facts. You have enough.
Yeah, I would agree. So what are some things that we can do to help heal this? What are some of the first thing? I have like a whole list here. My group's used to me going through an exhaustive list here. But what are some of the things that helped you? Well, first of all, we talked about stepping completely away so that you can observe it. What else?
Finding new groups of people that were growing like me.
Yes.
We always hear the saying that people come into your life for, a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And so as you grow, you want to have people around you that are also interested in growing and developing and becoming better at what they do and more connected. And if they're not if they don't have the same mindset as you, where they want to continue to grow and they have the qualities that you desire, then they need not be close to you. So I developed a new circle of friends. They always say that you're the sum of the 5 closest people around you.
Sure.
So finding out who your inner circle is and really looking at that can make a difference. So I changed the group of friends that I had. I started learning about how important it is to have gratitude in your life and how important it is to be connected. So I started spiritual practices like meditation, affirmations, gratitude. I started taking care of my mind, my body, and my spirit, and that developed self-confidence, self-worth, a positive attitude. And the stronger I got by doing that, the more open I became, the more I was willing to look inside and see some of those things that needed to be worked on that had been placed in my mind without me being aware of it. And I think just like someone who may have substance abuse needs to understand that those things are there and it needs to be changed before change happens, we need to see those things and recognize those things in ourselves. And sometimes doing that spiritual work is at least that's what helped me move on to the next level.
Yeah, thank you for that. Like, gratitude is an important piece for training our brain in any other new direction.
Yep.
I have some things that I had, and when you're dealing with a narcissist, they encourage you, if you can, to go no contact. And
yes.
So I think that's an important piece. For me, I was going to church every Sunday, even though I didn't believe, thinking I could send a powerful, inspirational message and help change the church. This is a common thing for a lot of LDS people to go through that stage where they think that they can change the church. Now that I see it, I'll change the church. And we do that in a narcissistic relationship too. Oh, now I see what he's doing. I'll react differently and he'll change and everything will be fine. That's
right.
Actually not what happened. So the no contact was important for me. And interestingly enough, my sister-in-law, who is still very active and was active at the time, when I came to her with some of the problems that I was having, she just looked at me and she goes, Wendi, maybe you just need to take a break. You just need to stop going and stop worrying about it and thinking about it. And that was the first time on her counsel. I couldn't give myself that permission, but on her counsel, I decided, okay, I'm gonna stop going. And sure enough, after a month, I could see more and more of how they were pulling me in and they were drawing me in, and the reasons why I was justifying going back over and over again. And until then, I couldn't see that. So we've talked a little bit about that. But one of the things that has really, really helped me, and it's been a big question in my mind, I don't know how this transfers over into Jehovah's Witness experience, but one thing to help break free of that is understanding the motive. Why are they doing what they're doing? And if you're in a narcissistic relationship, you probably realize, okay, that person needs narcissistic supply because something traumatic in their childhood happened where this is the only way that they can control their environment and the only way that they could receive validation. And so they've just created this program in their mind, and you just start to be one of the participants in their program. But the church is a little bit different in that I would say there's probably 1% of the people on the top echelons of the church who know exactly what they're doing, and it's an insidious program, and they're all about control, and they're all about the money, and they're all about this and that, and they know exactly what they're doing. But for the other 99% of the people who are in the church, their motive literally is that they want to save you, and they know the only way, and they want to be the right way, and they want to get to the celestial kingdom, and they want to be safe in the next life. Their motives literally are pure.
Yes. I find that to be very true in the Jehovah's Witness organization as well. I don't really know factually about the upper echelon, but I have my suspicions, as you know, as you do, that they know exactly what they're doing. I mean, they're the ones that put this whole thing together, right? So I find it hard to believe they don't know. But I do know that the people in the organization that are just, for lack of a better word, parishioners, or, you know, people who are in the congregation, they do it out of a sense of love. And, you know, it took a really long time for me to understand that. And it wasn't until I became a parent and I had children and I interacted with my children that I really understood that. It's kind of weird how that went, but I know what my feelings are for my children, and I would never be able to do anything that would separate me from my children unless it was so heartfelt love and really feeling like you were going to save them. And so I know what their beliefs are. You know, if I don't come back to Jehovah at Armageddon, I'm going to die. And they truly, truly believe that. And they think that by shunning me, it's going to pull me back, and they're going to save me somehow by doing that. So their motives are pure. And sometimes I think that once I understood that, it softened the blow. It softened the shunning a little bit, because you almost kind of feel bad for them, or feel at least that they have your best interest at heart, and they're not doing it to be narcissistic themselves, but they are trying to help you.
Yeah, and they're operating from a place of fear.
Yes.
And when you can understand that, so for me, I never had interaction with the general authority. I never had direct interaction with the prophet. I never had direct interaction with anybody higher up than like a stake president, or maybe a regional authority. And even that was very brief. But the people that really played out in my direct life, they were not doing it with evil intent. They were doing it because it was the protocol. They were trying to do the same thing I was trying to do, is get my family into heaven.
Yes.
And when you can realize it, it helps you to kind of let them off the hook. When you realize nobody was trying to destroy your life. There really wasn't anybody. There's a system in place that is broken and outdated. And you're trying to pull out of that system, and there's still people implementing that system, but they're doing it unconsciously,
Yes.
unintentionally. And their motives are real, they are pure, which is really crazy. And so when you can say that, recognize that, it's easier to forgive them, let them off the hook, and step away from it.
Yeah, you quit making those excuses that you were making before, because you see things, you know, everything is about your perception and what lens you use to see things through. And when you can switch those lenses because you have that understanding, it really does change a lot of how you feel, and it makes letting go even easier because you understand. You have a different level of understanding. At least for me, it helped a lot.
So then you have understanding the motive, separating yourself a little bit, or a lot, as much as you can.
A lot.
Finding a community for support, on doing that inner spiritual work. One thing that helped me was understanding how the environment was set up for my success within the group and my failure outside of the group. And
Yes.
so when I could see, the manipulation that I'm going to lose my family, or only the elite will be deceived in the next life, or, all these little quips that they have to try and pull you back in and doubt your doubts and not your faith. And these are only the things that we can know in the next life. And all these little things, you started to realize that they were designed to keep you in a bubble and to keep you really insulated in that world.
Yes.
So,
yeah, we had things like that too. I mean, they used fear, fear of Armageddon, fear of, being cast out, fear of shunning, losing your family. And one thing that they use as a hook to really keep people in there is their belief in the resurrection of the dead. If some of your loved ones died before Armageddon, they're going to come back to life in paradise. And so they would always say, oh, you want to stay in so that you can see, grandma or auntie or who, your husband or whoever. You don't want to miss a chance to see them again. So they use that hook and your love and your grief to keep you in.
We do that in LDS church too, where if someone is passed on, we're like, in order to qualify to be in the celestial kingdom with them and be with them, reunited with them, you have to live this exquisite life.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah,
it's craziness. It's just craziness.
When you threaten your family members, especially for a mom, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I want to be with that family. The fear of being separated from my family was so intense for me that I was willing to do whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that was pretty intense.
Yeah, it is.
One thing that this really helped me is understanding the victim triangle, where you have a perpetrator, a victim, and then you have a rescuer, or what they call a savior. And a lot of times we stay in this place of a victim, that all these things were done to us, and we were a victim of this abusive institution. Well, I have news for you. Most institutions we were raised in are pretty corrupt and toxic. It was the best that we had at the time, and we are evolving people. And so our institutions and our methodology is going to improve all the time. So basically, we're raising our kids in a broken environment that we think is better than the environment that we were raised in. But part of this evolution is recognizing that we have to break free from the old, outdated ways of living, and that you're not really a victim of it. It's just that was your experience. That was your experience until that moment when you woke up, broke away, and now you're readjusting, recalibrating, resetting everything so you can live in an upgraded environment. So that was the key thing for me, is to stop playing the role of a victim. And it's hard to stop playing the role of the victim if you keep listening to stories that keep you in the role of the victim.
Exactly, because that's almost like giving them your power, and they hold that power over you as long as they occupy any space in your mind or in your thoughts or in your actions. So until you take your power back, instead of giving it to them, by allowing them to occupy any part of your mind or your thought process, you will then stop being the victim.
And that's a challenge. For me, it is a challenge, because my whole brain, 90% of it was woven in doctrine, and every aspect and every choice I made in my life had to do with some flavor with the doctrine. And so weeding that 90% out so that I could actually feel what it feels like to have my own thoughts and to have my own desires that aren't going through this filter of indoctrination is a process. It is not. And it has to be intentional. It can happen accidentally or by osmosis in time. But when you apply intention to it and you say, I got to get this stuff rooted out, I think the time that you heal is exponentially faster.
Yes.
Did you say that when you went and took the deprogramming course, that things started to really shift for you?
It did. It was amazing how quickly it shifted. Now, again, that was over 25 years, closer to 30 years of being out.
Wow.
And yeah, when I went through the deprogramming course, it really woke me up to what it meant to be mind control programmed.
Yeah.
That you have to be conscious about removing the old files. I remember Rodney explaining it to me kind of like a computer program, and how you have all these files on your computer program.
And it bogs it down.
Right, and it bogs it down, it gets too full. So you have to remove those, purge those, and replace them with something new. So whenever you change a paradigm or remove a paradigm, you have to replace it with a different paradigm to take its place. So you also have to learn to value your choices and trust your choices and your intuition, because you're so used to filtering everything through what Jehovah wanted. Would he have wanted that? Or does the organization approve of that? All the way down to your clothing. And I know you guys have had some crazy underwear stories. We didn't have those, but I mean, those kind of simple decisions were always framed by what the church or what the organization that you were in wanted. And so you have to start learning to trust your own judgment. And that's scary and it takes time, but it's important. It's very important.
So I just reminded me in relationships with a narcissist, the narcissist tries to disempower you and make you feel like you're not going to be able to be successful outside of the relationship. And
Right.
I think in the church we have that same program going where if you raise your children in a non-religious environment, they're probably not going to be very moral. Or if you start giving yourself permission to drink alcohol or drugs or do anything, that you're probably just going, the very worst that could happen is inevitable for you.
Yeah. So yeah, we are always taught that, you know, anything outside the religion, you're just not going to make it. You're going to fail. Everybody's bad. Everybody's out to get you. Everybody's part of the devil's plan. And so there's a lot of fear about leaving, because you're going to be outside of the light and you're going to be consumed by darkness if you leave.
Yeah. So I don't know how it was for you and your social media. For me and my social media, when I came out, it was about 2 years after I had left mentally, that I came out on Facebook. I was tired of wearing a scarf around my shoulders whenever I was out with friends who might want to post something on social media. I was just tired of living the dual life. And I finally just came out, and I was very vocal about me leaving the church. I know a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses would prefer not to be seen or make a big deal out of it or make it so cut and dry, because in your situation, is this true that if someone is disfellowshipped, that if you're in the organization, you still try to have a relationship with them, that you risk getting disfellowshipped too?
You know, I believe that's still the case. Yes, unless they've changed something, I believe that that's true. You are not supposed to associate with someone who is disfellowshipped, and you can, or at least you were able to, or it used to be that you would also risk being disfellowshipped. I don't keep up on the doctrines, and it's been like 30 years, so, but I believe that that's still the case. It was when I was involved. So people are very shy about showing what they do on social media, or what someone else might see. We even have people that are so afraid when they first come out that when they join our group, they'll have a different name. Yeah. And they won't put their picture, right? And they'll come into our group looking for help because they need support, but they're still so afraid that somebody might be a mole in the group and then go back and tell on them. And then they're going to have all these horrible things happen to them. It's a horrible way to live. It's so freeing when you can just step away and not have to worry about that. And I'm not trying to imply that it's easy or fast.
No.
But it is, for me, the easiest way to heal is to close that door, no contact, and just move forward.
Yeah. Sometimes that's easy to do, and other times we have to be very delicate. It's a very fragile situation, and only we're going to know the best. But
Yes.
best way to do it for us. But I will say that once I made that announcement on social media and made it clear, oh, such a relief was off my shoulders, because now I'm just going to post whatever I want to, and you get to adjust. And that is one element of being raised in a narcissistic environment. It's really important, is to access your own power, and that power comes at the expense of being willing to disappoint other people, being willing for people to misunderstand you, to misquote you. And this past year, I've been very vocal about some things, and they've started this whole witch hunt. I think they call them flying monkeys in the narcissistic world, where people are coming at you and saying how awful you are. And they're going to go tell the authorities. And that's kind of how a narcissist sets up their world, is they have the flying monkeys to make sure that if you get out and you start telling their story and telling truth about them, then they have people that will discredit you. And so what I'm trying to explain here is that we don't realize, until we're willing to have people disappointed in us, have people even be hurt and separated from us in our life, that there's actually a pool of power, personal power, that you haven't accessed yet. That until you're willing to disappoint those people and not please them anymore, and not capitulate to what they're expecting from you all the time, and not try and manage their emotions about how they're going to feel about what you're doing, it's almost like you just get this surge of energy that feels so raw and authentic and really true to you. Have you experienced that when you kind of stepped out and started?
I did. And I'll tell you guys a quote that everybody's familiar with, and that is, a life without freedom isn't a life at all. And until you let go of all of that, and I'm not saying it's easy, but until you let go and you don't care, and you become strong enough and courageous enough and recognize your own power, and you let go of all of that, you can exhale, and it feels so good. And then you feel free. You feel like you could fly, because they were weighing you down. And, I kind of, every once in a while, it's a process, right? It's a process. I am one of the co-authors of a book called Fear to Freedom, where there were 16 authors explaining what their life was in mind control environments, and then what we did as we moved out and moved on, and what worked for us. And I remember writing the chapter and the book being released on Amazon, and the author Jack Gray, who helped us put it together, let everybody know that the book was out there. Now, I've been out over 35 years. I've done the deprogramming, and I would tell people, oh, I'm really good. But I remember the first time I heard that, there was still that little, what if they see? And then I'm like, I don't care if they see. What was that all about? But you still have some of those things that will pop up if you don't continually work on it. And I was so happy that it only took me a second to say, well, who cares if they see? What more can they do to me than they've already done?
Right.
They shunned me at the age of 20 years old. I've raised my family. They don't know their grandchildren. I mean, what more could they do to me than they've already done? And I've survived, and I'm thriving. And so if they see the book, who cares?
Yeah.
I'm standing in my power, and I'm free. And that's all that I care about, is my personal development.
Yeah, and I used to say that a lot of the program, like, we have one prime directive as bioorganic organisms on the planet, and that is to grow, grow, grow. And there's only one person on the planet who's in charge and responsible for your environment so that you can grow, and that is you. And so weeding out the things and the people, the programs, the institutions, and all those things that are not serving you anymore, it's a scary process, but it's necessary for our growth.
And once you do that and you learn your life's purpose, I mean, we all came here with a purpose, and we all came here with gifts to share with other people. And when we're being stifled in that organization and we don't really get to recognize what our gifts are, our soul is uneasy, and it doesn't, feel satisfied. And so, you know, we were all vibrationally higher and smarter and more courageous than those people that are in the religion, because if that's why we couldn't stay. We were stronger, we were, you know, energetically vibrating higher, and that's why we recognized that that environment wasn't good for us. So when we find the courage to leave, find the courage to figure out who you are, figure out what your gifts are and what you're supposed to be doing, because you're supposed to find your gifts, recognize them, and then share them. And only until you do that will you find satisfaction and love and joy and peace. You came here to share your gifts.
Yeah.
And so find your gifts. I mean, leaving was just step one. You knew that wasn't it. So let's do the work and find out what our gifts are so that we can settle our soul and find peace and satisfy what we came here to do.
I fully agree with that. One of the processes to understand the stages, I like to have tools to help us to show where we fall on the spectrum. So one of the things that I've read about recovering from narcissistic abuse is, first, you are a victim. You recognize and own that you are a victim. I'm a victim of this institution of entangled, outdated principles, and just say, yeah, I was raised in a toxic environment. And that step alone is really difficult. But once you're able to acknowledge it and look at it and recognize the toxic patterns, you go into a place of being a survivor. So victim, survivor. And in the place of survivor, you're starting to understand the programs, you're starting to understand what's happened to you, but you're still willing to be a little bit stuck. Again, because you're using outdated modes to try and operate in a new world. And so that would be like in my dragonfly parallel. It would be like you're a dragonfly, you were a nymph for so long in the water, and you come out and you're trying to be a nymph when your wings are starting to emerge, when you're meant to be a land and aerial creature. And so you're trying to do land and aerial things according to the aquatic laws.
Yes.
So it doesn't work. And
Right.
so in that place of survivor, it's recognizing and having the courage. But there's another level, and that is the thriver. You start to thrive in the world, and you turn that toxicity and unhealthy environments, you turn that into resilience. It turns into inner strength, inner power, inner wisdom, inner peace. And that doesn't, sometimes we mistake it for anger and I'm vindictive and I have the rights to be vengeful and that can happen, but it's not, it feels a little bit different when you've transferred it into the thrive stage. And that is, it feels sturdy, stable, strong, directed, peaceful, sound. It's not this undercurrent of anxiety going on in that thriving stage. But I wanted to lean into this fourth stage, and that's what you were talking about, Cyndi, and that is you come into a place of being able to create your life and become the creator. And you start to hone in on those gifts and you begin to use them in a way that is meant to bless the world. And many times it was this environment, the toxicity of this environment and the process of getting it out that helps you identify what those gifts are so that you can grow them and use them in the world. And for me, being raised in such a critical environment and me becoming such a critical perfectionist person in that environment, that is now becoming my greatest gift, is to just be able to love people right where they are, because I went through the fire to eradicate that poisonous attitude out of my mind. And so sometimes the greatest gift I can offer is just space of safety where I get you. I love you. I'm not judging you. How can I help you? A lot of people go through that. They become healers, or they become lawyers because of the injustice, or they become caregivers, or they become psychologists, or they become historians because they want to be able to use their experience to offer the world and contribute to the world in a way that they couldn't have had they not gone through this big process.
Right. It's when we understand that our past doesn't necessarily define us. It's part of who we have become. And sometimes you might discover, as you're talking about, your gifts needed the experience that we had back then to develop and teach us lessons so that we could evolve and become into the person that's going to share those gifts. So when you look back at your past as something that was a lesson, something that you needed, there were some good things that I learned from that. You know, I learned how to do public speaking. I learned how to be strong and independent. I learned how to be courageous and not really care what other people thought. Because if you think about it, and you look back when we were part of the elitist group and we all thought that we had the truth and nobody else did, as Jehovah's Witnesses, as a small child, I had to remain seated in a classroom while everyone else stood and did the Pledge of Allegiance or sang the national anthem. As a child, that's hard, but you were taught to do that. And so I had inner strength and courage for the wrong thing then, maybe, you know, but it taught me a skill that now when I've seen the light and I'm learning what my gifts are and I'm sharing those, it gives me those same qualities.
Yeah.
Kind of like the yin and yang, right? The light and dark. You learned things while you were over here that you needed to develop so you could be the best person. So I now look at my past not as something that was traumatic and I was a victim to, but I look at my past as something I needed to learn a lesson from to become who I was meant to be. And that really helps you emotionally separate the hurt and the anger and the depression and the anxiety and all of the negative feelings that you may have held before when you just think about your past in a different manner.
Yeah, I agree. I call this, it's kind of like alchemy, where initially it feels like you have resentment of the past. And if only I wasn't living under that indoctrination, I would have constructed my life completely different. So you have resentment, remorse. There's like a sense of loss of what could have been. And the alchemy happens when you're no longer in a state of resentment and you see that lifestyle and the incongruencies and the broken pieces and parts of it as more of like a curriculum.
Yes.
That's my curriculum.
Yes.
And that's what I love about doing my rebirthing courses, because you can see the layers of indoctrination that were placed on the psyche at different stages of your development. Yes. And when you can see that and say, okay, how did that weaken me? How did that cause me to not allow more light and authenticity in my life? And when you see that, it's almost the jewel or the gem there waiting for you to move forward. And those are the little treasures that are there, but you can't get there and find the treasure until you're willing to move past the victimhood and the resentment and say, no, this is just a curriculum. This is just my life looking at me, and I look at it as a book instead of what happened to me and how dare these things happen to me. Now I see it as a book that happened to that girl, not me.
Exactly.
Me. And you know, that girl, and this is what she learned, and I tell my own story now.
Exactly. And you know, Rodney, one of the things that Rodney Allgood teaches our group is, you know what? You could have a book about when you were an LDS, or you could have a book about when you were Jehovah's Witness. Close the book.
Yeah.
Put it on a shelf and start a new book. Not just a new chapter, but a new book. And it has a whole bunch of blank pages that you get to write. But there's always going to be that connection between the first book and the second book. You might have to take that first book off the shelf a few times, you know, throughout your life for different reasons, but start a new book.
I like that. What I like when Ronnie explains that is he talks about how Rocky and Rambo both have the same star characters, but they're totally different stories.
Yes.
He says that's going to be your life. You're going to have a different location. It's not in the boxing ring. Now it's in the jungle. You know,
right.
you're still the same character, but there's different partners, different storylines. It's just a whole different world. But if you try to just write the next chapter, you're going to get Rocky 4, Rocky 5, Rocky 10. At some point, like you said, you have to close the book and say, nah, I'm writing a whole new book, and this is me, and I'm the new character, and this is what I'm going to create.
And maybe Rambo would have never existed without Rocky, right? Because nobody knew who he was. So there's always something to learn from the first book, the first chapter, your past lives. But we all know that we came here, we came in for a reason, and we help define our lives by learning that reason and sharing that. And when you can do that, it brings about a whole different set of emotions that are on the positive side. You feel so calm and peaceful and relaxed, and you feel like, oh, my life has purpose now. And there's nothing greater than waking up in the morning knowing what your purpose is and knowing that you have something to share with someone else, because you will always learn more when you're sharing your gifts and interacting with other people. You are so open to receiving what their gifts are, and they just enrich your life even more. So I just really encourage people to do that shadow work and figure out what they need to do to heal from being in that type of environment.
Yeah, I believe her in that too. That's why we do what we do, right?
Right, exactly.
So I just want to leave my my awesome Empower family with a little message, and that is to understand that the more willing you are to do the excavation and to clear out those old patterns and to understand and to step back and recognize that this is a toxic environment, there's something better. The more you do that work, the more clarity you're going to have, the more peace you're going to have, the more direction, the more purpose. It might, if it feels right now, when someone says you have a purpose in the life, I have a reason to get up in the morning, and that's not resonating with you, or you're like, I wish that would happen. Is it even possible for me? I'm just going to let you know right now, there's some doctrines that are woven into your psyche that are hazing and clouding that possibility for you, because it's there. I truly believe it's there for all of us. And the more we're able to clear and cleanse that out, the clearer the sky is, the more directed, the more intuitive you become. Would you say that was your life too, Cyndi?
Yes, I would wholly agree with that. Yes.
That is why I do what I do, because I love to help empower people. Cyndi, thank you so much for
thanks for having me. I love it.
Our group.
Sure.
I always find it so interesting how Jehovah's Witness and LDS are so much alike in how we're trying to deprogram and restructure. It's just a reason for us to be more united and love each other, and
exactly
that we've kind of been wounded in the same fashion.
Yes. Build a tribe, build a bridge between the two of us.
Cyndi, feel free to share any information on in our group that you want. I've kind of introduced you. Just share your wisdom. We appreciate having you here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Take care.